Over the past 2 weeks, we've learned a lot about the Shema, arguably the most important prayer in Judaism. This week, we conclude our journey as we answer some remaining questions, like what's up with all the mumbling and kissing, and why do we say the Shema differently at certain times? So if you give me a few minutes, I'll answer these questions and more as we complete our exploration of the Shema. So what about some of those other practices you might notice with the Shema? For instance, the custom of kissing the tzitzit or ritual fringes. First of all, there is only an expectation to wear a talit when saying the Shema in the morning because of the phrase, uritem oto, and you shall see the tzitzit. The idea being that you wear a talit only when you can see the tzitzit, which in the ancient world meant during the day. The only exception to this rule is on Yom Kippur, when we wear a talit for the evening Kol Nidre service. The reason we wear a talit then is because that evening service technically begins while it's still daytime. But I digress. When we say the Shema in the morning, it's customary to gather the four corners of our talit in our left hand and hold the tzitzit close to our hearts. Then, when we come to the Vayomer paragraph, we move the tzitzit to our right hand and kiss them every time we say the word tzitzit, and look at them when we say uritem oto. We do this to show how dear the mitzvot are to us. You might also notice that people pause for a moment between the first line of the Shema and the Ahavta. This is because there's a custom to recite silently to ourselves the phrase Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed, or blessed is the name of God's glorious kingdom forever and ever. This comes from a midrash taught by Reish Lakish in the Talmud. He explains that when Jacob was dying and called his sons into his room to be blessed, at one point he faltered. Jacob, who was also known as Israel, was concerned this was because one of his descendants would not carry on his faith. But Jacob's sons reassured him by saying, Shema Yisrael, or listen, Father, Israel, don't worry, Adonai is our God, and we are one in this belief, just as Adonai is one. Hearing these words, Jacob responds by saying, Baruch Shem Kavod. But of course, this phrase does not appear in the Torah between the contiguous verses of Shema and V'ahavta, so we don't say it out loud. The only time we do say it out loud, though, is also on Yom Kippur, because it's on that day that all Jews, both observant and heretical alike, pray together. And to make sure the heretics don't think we're saying anything inappropriate under our breath, we say this phrase out loud. You might also have noticed that the person leading services ends the Shema by saying Adonai Elohechem Emet, which is a combination of the last two words of the Shema and the first word from the blessing that follows it. This is done to bring the total number of words recited as part of the Shema to 248, which corresponds to the number of positive commandments, as well as the number of bones in the human body, according to archaic understanding. So, by saying these three additional words, we indicate our intention to perform the mitzvot with our entire being. However, this is only done when saying the Shema as part of a minyan, a group of 10 or more Jewish adults. When saying the Shema without a minyan, we instead add the words El Melech Ne'eman at the very beginning. These words mean God is a faithful ruler, and they form the acronym Amen. You might also have noticed that people ignore you when they're saying the Shema. This is because we are not supposed to interrupt our focus. But if someone important, like a head of state, your parent, or your rabbi were to greet you, you can pause to respond at any time other than during the first verse. However, if anyone else were to greet you, you can pause between paragraphs, but it's better to wait until you finish the entire Shema. Finally, there are actually several times during a service that you might hear the Shema, most notably early on during Birkat HaShachar, or at the start of the Torah service on Shabbat, and even during the Musaf Amidah. Anytime we say just the first verse of the Shema and not the other sections, we're not actually saying the Shema. We're simply referencing the fact that we, as Jews, are known to say the Shema. Therefore, all of the rules I've mentioned in these videos don't apply. That means the only time we cover our eyes for the Shema is when we say all four parts, not just the first line. And there you have it, pretty much everything you've ever wanted to know about the Shema. Hopefully, you'll have a better idea of what's going on the next time you're sitting in a service or wanting to say the Shema on your own. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I hope you'll join me for another Taste of Torah next week.